daily soccer podcast with the Global Sports Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Daily English Premier League podcast as I stop the sweeper playing twice. It's been a somewhat quiet day of Premier League news, apart from one thing that we will kick off with, which was Chelsea were charged by the FA with 74 alleged breaches of its regulations between 2009 and 2022. That's the big news of the day as we come back into Premier League football this weekend. The charges for Chelsea are from a period of time when Roman Abramovich was in charge and primarily relate to events occurring between the 2010-11 and 2015-16 seasons, is what the FA have said. Abramovich was disqualified as a Chelsea director in March of 2022, following, obviously, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So Chelsea have very much distanced themselves, the current ownership group that is, from these charges, clearly kind of saying and implying that they had nothing to do with this, and they actually self-reported themselves. Chelsea's statement in response to this was that Chelsea is pleased to confirm that its engagement with the FA concerning matters that were self-reported by the club is now reaching a conclusion. It also says that prior to the purchase, the ownership group became aware of potentially incomplete financial reporting concerning historical transactions and other breaches of FA rules. So, like I say, very much distancing themselves from the Abramovich era, saying this had nothing to do with the Clearlake group. But it's just another big team like Man City, who we are 2 or 3 years on now, having 115 charges, and we've heard nothing still, even though it feels like we were told we were supposed to know months ago, and we still don't know anything, which feels a little bit weird as they just continue to not be punished for it or cleared from it if they are somehow innocent in it, which feels unlikely. Like, sort of no smoke without fire. How would you not be guilty of 115 breaches? But this is slightly different in that Chelsea reported themselves about it, and like I just read, the Clearlake group reported it to the FA, and I presume UEFA as well, because UEFA fined Chelsea £8.6 million following its self-reporting in July 2023. So I presume they reported it to both. That's the big difference from this to the Man City one. And I should also say the FA said the charges are in relation to the FA's agent regulations on working with intermediaries, and the third-party investment in players regulations. So reading into that, it's sort of, I guess it would be paying extra to agents and other people in players' camps to get players to join them. And this period that these breaches are between, they are when Chelsea won both their Champions Leagues and 3 of their 5 Premier Leagues. And it also said in the Athletic article I read on this that the club are currently expecting a financial sanction from the FA rather than a sporting one, which I want to say, once again, a team is gaining a sporting advantage by breaking the rules and getting away with it with just a financial sanction, which the only other times where they've got a sporting sanction are sort of Everton and Nottingham Forest, and they both had a sporting sanction that they were able to overcome and survive in the Premier League. So it didn't really harm them But obviously, Nottingham Forest are now playing European football after spending loads of money to get players, breaking the rules in doing so, and it set them up to where they've got to now. So Chelsea have until September 19th to respond to this. We will see what happens with it, but it's just, again, like, more rule breaking, more stuff happening with the higher ups of clubs, which fans shouldn't, fans should be able to believe their club is doing things the right way, and it seems continually that clubs aren't, whether that's with breaking regulations like this or moral and ethical things, which I experienced being an Arsenal fan. Yeah, it's a more and more depressing world in terms of football. But we'll move on from that because there's not really a lot more we can speak about in terms of that, because all we know is they've been charged with these breaches, what regulations they have breached, and that Chelsea are cooperating with them. So it's just a shame that it's going to be another financial sanction, which we know Chelsea don't have a problem with. They spend lots of money on transfers, and obviously basically every club is owned by billionaires. Like, financial sanctions are nothing. But we'll hear a bit about Zencastr and then talk about the Premier League Hall of Fame quickly, because I got something quick to say about that.
Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out as the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone, AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the description to learn more about Zencastr.
So the Premier League Hall of Fame voting for 2025 opened this week, and it brought up a feeling I've had about the Hall of Fame in terms of the Premier League's Hall of Fame for a couple of years now, that it just doesn't feel like a special thing, and it wouldn't even surprise me if many of the less online fans don't even know it's a thing. It's not something you can easily see on the Premier League website, for example, unless it's happening at the time you happen to go on the Premier League's website. And it's into its 5th year, and it doesn't really feel like it's evolved at all or become more special. It started in 2021. It was initially supposed to start in 2020, but obviously there was the pandemic. And if I quickly run through the current inductees, you've got Henry and Shearer, and then in 2021, along with Beckham, Bergkamp, Cantona, Gerrard, Keane, and Lampard, who were inducted by fan vote. 2022, you had Rooney and Vieira inducted, and then Aguero, Drogba, Company, Schmeichel, Scholes, and Wright inducted by fan vote. 2023 had Sir Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger, and then Adams, Cech, and Rio Ferdinand by fan vote. And 2024, it was Ashley Cole inducted, and then Andy Cole and John Terry inducted by the fan vote. So there's not even a consistency from 2021 through 2024 in terms of the number of people initially inducted. It's gone from 2 in the first 3 years to 1 last year in Ashley Cole. And then it was 6 players inducted by fan vote in the first 2 years, then down to 3, and then down to 2 last year. So, and I feel like it felt more special not being inducted by fan vote. That may not really make sense, but I remember Henry and Shearer were inducted, and those 2 were the initial 2. And then the other 6 must have come around a little bit later. I'm not sure how much later they were inducted, but it just doesn't feel as special as those first two. And those first two don't even really feel special because it's just posted on social media or their website with a picture of them with this tiny black and gold Premier League Hall of Fame disc. And then a few hours later, we move on with our days. Like, there's no ceremony, there's no really video package of sorts. I think they like show some highlights maybe when they induct them, but it's not a big deal. These are the legends of the league, and almost feels like a token gesture. Like, it should feel more special. I think to the WWE's Hall of Fame, for example, there's the big ceremony on WrestleMania weekend, and while it could be a bit boring, the people being inducted have their moment to give a speech and how important it is for them to be inducted, how talk about their career a bit. And whereas you look at the Premier League's Hall of Fame and it's a picture, maybe some highlights of the player, and we move on. There's not really a celebration of these players or getting to highlight how good these players were for younger generations. So, for example, I think that, even almost every player in the first year, if you look at Henry, Shearer, Beckham, Bergkamp, Cantona, Gerrard, Keane, and Lampard, I'm 23 next month, and the only two I really saw were Gerrard and Lampard, and it was kind of an age I was too young to really appreciate them. So, and the others, like, I didn't see any of them live. I've seen highlights, obviously, especially of Henry and Shearer and Bergkamp. But like, show these players, show their importance. Why are they being inducted into this Hall of Fame for those younger generations, so that they might then be inspired to go look themselves into how good these players were. And it just should be more of a big thing. I looked into what basketball do for their Hall of Fame. They had a recent induction last week, actually. And there's also doesn't seem like a huge deal, but rather than it being an NBA Hall of Fame, they just have a basketball Hall of Fame, but they have a museum, the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. And I think even something like that, putting it in, for example, the National Football Museum in Manchester, having a section for the Premier League Hall of Fame in that, could be something that makes it a little bit more special. But it feels like you need a ceremony of sorts, and perhaps you can combine it with the WSL, or just women's football generally, because a lot of the legends of women's football were before the WSL. So you think to people like Kelly Smith, or Alex Scott, having a moment where they are honoured and get an opportunity to have their career celebrated. So there are so many opportunities for them to make this feel like more of a special thing. The nominees for 2025 fan vote came out this week. I'll quickly run through them. You've got Sol Campbell, Michael Carrick, Jermaine Defoe, Patrice Evra, Cesc Fabregas, Les Ferdinand, Robbie Fowler, Eden Hazard, Gary Neville, Michael Owen, Teddy Sheringham, David Silva, Yaya Toure, Edwin van der Sar, Nemanja Vidic. Those are all players who will be in it eventually, but will it mean anything down the line when they are inducted? Who really knows? But when it's in its fifth year and it still doesn't feel it feels less important than it did in that first year. And even that first year, like I was saying, didn't feel particularly important, but you see it and go, maybe this will be something that will be important. But we're heading into the fifth year of inductees, and it just doesn't feel like anything that is. It doesn't feel like an accomplishment for these people. And maybe it is to them personally, but from a fan's perspective, it doesn't feel like an accomplishment for these people. We'll see who gets inducted this year. I feel like it'll probably be Gary Neville from that list, but maybe because of how much we see him, people will be less likely to vote for him because I think he annoys a lot of people. But that's all I have to say on the Hall of Fame for now. We'll hear about Bioniq and then hear about who could debut at the weekend after, obviously, the deadline day happened after the last set of fixtures. So let's hear about Bioniq.
Your body is unique. And Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bioniq, the world's most personalised supplements. Bioniq provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right level to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bioniq. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
So, looking ahead to the weekend, we return to Premier League football after the international break. But obviously, we had deadline day since the last set of fixtures, and there's some players who have come into their teams and might make an instant impact this weekend. So, going through them alphabetically in terms of the players I looked at and think look like they should or could make an impact. We start off at Villa. Jadon Sancho and Harvey Elliott come into a struggling Villa who are goalless through the first 3 games with just 1 point. I think Harvey Elliott is maybe more likely to come in because I think he will have had more of he's had a pre-season, I believe, compared to Sancho, who was in the bomb squad as it was termed for United, so I don't think he had any pre-season. And Villa are looking for a goal. They have just 1 point through the first 3 games, and Elliott's an option to come in and bring a bit of creativity, perhaps. So I look to him primarily of those two. On to Burnley. Florentino Luis feels like he has to come into this Burnley 11. They played fine against Man United, and obviously were incredibly unlucky to not come away with a point or more, even with a slightly odd offside ruling in that game. But Luis is a bit of a midfield destroyer, who is being compared a bit to João Painha, who obviously was that guy for Fulham before he moved on to Bayern Munich, before now being on loan at Tottenham. He averaged over 6 tackles and interceptions per game for Benfica last season, and only 2 Premier League players averaged more than that last year. So you feel like he'll come into that midfield, try and break things up for them. Garnacho at Chelsea, he was at their last game before the break, and for a team who seem unable to set themselves on some starting wingers, you can easily see him coming into the side and starting on the left wing for them, especially with the likes of Gittins not really impressing in his first minutes in a blue shirt for them. At Fulham, just down the road from Chelsea, Kevin arrived from Shakhtar as their record signing. He'll almost certainly come into the team. Not only is he their record signing, they had Castagna on the wing against Chelsea, so surely he will start against Leeds on Saturday. I don't believe he was on international duty for Brazil, so he will have had some time with the people who were left over at Fulham and be a little bit more integrated. Unlike the next person we move on to, Alexander Isak at Liverpool, I would be mind blown if he's involved at all really this weekend. Maybe he makes the bench more of a kind of token thing to go, look, we have this guy. But I really don't see him getting properly involved for a couple of games, to be honest, because he's had no preseason at all, no game time until some minutes off the bench for Sweden in this international break. So he only had his first training session with his new teammates on Wednesday. So it'll be interesting to see how long it takes for Slot to feel he's ready to be integrated, but I don't think it'll be this weekend. We move on to Manchester and the blue side first of all. Gianluigi Donnarumma obviously arrived and you imagine comes in straight away for James Trafford after his blunders in the first few games. It definitely feels harsh on the young English goalkeeper because he won't have expected them to go and sign another goalkeeper after him and almost take his position from him before he even got settled in back at Manchester City. It'll be interesting to see how the Italian does because he's not strong with his feet, and that's where Trafford had those issues. And Trafford is held in a higher regard with playing with his feet than Donnarumma is, and it would just be interesting to see how Donnarumma copes with that. Maybe it's unlikely, but maybe there'll be a bit of a split. I saw something that City wanted Donnarumma for those kind of Champions League games where making the big saves is the difference, and we saw him do that as PSG won the Champions League last year. But for me, he's still not a goalkeeper I'm comfortable in saying is truly like world class and elite, despite him having probably his strongest year last year. But I can't forget how poor he was before that season. Now onto the red side, and it's a similar change as Seni Lamans will certainly come in for Onana and Bayindir. Onana moving on loan to Trabzonspor. We'll see how much he's able to change things for United, because ultimately he is just a goalkeeper, but if they can stop nonsense goals being conceded, then that will definitely improve things enough and be able to stop them throwing away results. But he's going straight into a Manchester derby, so there'll be a new man in goal for both teams for the big game of this weekend. Up to Newcastle then, and with suspensions and departures, it feels likely that both Johan Wisser and Nick Voltemada will come straight in against Wolves at home. You imagine that'll be a fairly easy introduction for the two, but we'll see how they integrate into the team. I don't believe Voltemada had the strongest of international breaks with Germany, but I don't think they'll massively change things. But it'll be interesting to see how both these integrate. Will Voltemada be the central guy and Wisser on the wing? That's how I imagine things at the moment, especially with Anthony Gordon still suspended. Onto Spurs, they introduced Xavi Simons before their loss to Bournemouth, and with all of their number 10s injured at the moment still, I'm fairly sure in saying that at least. I'm not sure if Kulusevski's back, I don't believe he is. Frank, he kind of has to introduce the Dutchman straight into the team. Along with that, it'll be interesting to see if Randall Kolo Muani comes straight in as striker, replacing Richarlison. Could be two new men in the centre of attack for Spurs as they look to bounce back from that loss to Bournemouth. Then finally, Sunderland, you've got both Brian Brobby and Lucharel Gertrude coming in late for the Black Cats. I felt like they were lacking a number 9 a little bit. Mark Gui. I'm glad I will no longer really have to say his name as he went back to Chelsea from what I remember. Brobby scored 18 for Ajax in the 23-24 season. I believe he fell away a bit last year, so maybe this is something of a gamble that he will return to that sort of form from Sunderland, whereas Gertrude, I think, is more of a certain upgrade and certain thing for them, as he'll replace Trey Hume. Both of Burnley's goals against Sunderland came down his side, and he was outjumped by Igor Thiago for Brentford's goal, so they were clearly seeing that as a point of failure for them. And the, I believe also Dutchman, coming in from Leipzig will replace him. But that is all the potential debutants I believe will happen this weekend, as I tried to find something to fit into the third segment of this podcast. That is going to be all from me, and there will be the preview of the Premier League's action on tomorrow's podcast, I imagine. But thank you for joining me for today's. Managed to do a much quicker one than usual. But this has been the Global Sports Podcast Network Daily Premier League Podcast. I've been Nick Bird. Thank you for joining me, and see you tomorrow.
Your daily soccer podcast with the Global Sports Podcast Network.